Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to address a topic that's become more and more relevant over recent years, and that is whether newly released Halo stories and games and lore have sort of rendered the original Halo Trilogy pointless. Now, I want to stress here that I'm going to be talking specifically about the lore and story of the trilogy. Obviously, gameplay and level design really can't become obsolete unless they're designed poorly, which is definitely not an issue that the original trilogy suffers from. Before we start though, I hate having to ask you guys this, honestly, but at this point, I feel like it's kind of necessary. Recently, I've been getting a lot of reports that people aren't being notified by YouTube when I release a video, and views for myself and also other people that I know have been weirdly low too, so if you enjoy my content and you want to stick with me throughout this Halo drought and also into Halo Infinite, then please make sure you hit the bell and also enable all notifications for my videos. Again, I hate having to ask you guys to do this, but these past few weeks have made it quite apparent that I kind of need to, which it sucks, but it's the way the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. Anyways, on to the topic at hand. The main reason that I've seen people suggesting this in recent years is actually quite valid, at least to a degree. The argument is that a majority of the plot points built up mostly in Halo 2 and Halo 3 that were resolved at the end of Halo 3 have ended up resurfacing since 343 took over the franchise, which of course detracts, if not entirely nullifies their conclusions in the trilogy. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with either side here, it's very much a multifaceted argument, but it's interesting nonetheless and it's worth discussing. But the real question is, does it actually hold any weight? Well, I figured the best way to test that was by looking at the main story arcs that were tied up in Halo 3, and what happened to them after Bungie handed Halo over to 343. So let's dive right into it. The first and arguably most egregious case of this is with the Flood. The original trilogy had two equally important underlying enemy factions, the Covenant and of course the Flood. Now obviously the story was building up to the defeat of both of them, but it's arguable that the Flood were the more important faction overall, given that the final crescendo of the trilogy was their defeat, with the Covenant being defeated 2 missions prior, and it's made to seem like a be-all end-all. I mean, Cortana even says,
"Destroy the Flood once and for all."
Truth and the Covenant, the Flood, it's finished.
It's finished.
So, when Awakening the Nightmare released and the Flood showed back up inside High Charity on the Ark of all places, people naturally got annoyed and confused, and this is really where I saw this argument become a popular talking point. That said, did the Flood's return invalidate their defeat? Well, yes and no. When Chief overloaded High Charity's reactor core, it almost entirely destroyed it, as you'd expect. The interior was mostly obliterated and only the outer shell remained, which eventually crash-landed on the Ark. Now, despite the Gravemind and also some stragglers being able to get to Installation 08 in time, we can safely assume that a large majority of the Flood in the High Charity Hive were destroyed by this. Then, when Chief fired Installation 08 and tore it apart, the Gravemind, along with any Flood on the Ark and the Ring, and also those lucky few who survived inside High Charity, should have been killed too, but clearly they weren't. And this is where the problem lies. Chief fired the Halo, and the dialogue we get in Halo 3 after the fact suggests that doing so just worked as intended, defeating the Flood once and for all. However, Guilty Spark made it pretty damn clear that the ring wasn't complete, and that firing the ring would destroy it. Now, if firing the Halo would cause it to tear itself apart, you'd assume that the firing effect maybe just wouldn't work quite as intended. It'd be like firing a gun and having the barrel explode as you pulled the trigger, and yet still expecting the bullet to travel straight. It just wouldn't happen. And if that wasn't enough evidence to convince you that the Flood's return wasn't complete bullshit, maybe the Gravemind himself's final words in Halo 3 will be.
Defeat is simply a condition of time. You are sentenced our levels to serve.
So, there there you have it folks, the Gravemind himself saying that the Flood ebb and flow like the tide. They arrive and then recede like a never-ending cycle. However, with all that said, was reintroducing the Flood in High Charity on the Ark of all places the best idea? Well, probably not. In fact, of all the locations for them to make a return, that was probably the worst possible choice. That said though, canonically, this doesn't invalidate Halo 3's ending, but I still totally understand why some people think that it does. Okay, the next plot point that's supposedly been invalidated is the fall of the Covenant. Now, I think it goes without saying that Halo 3 makes us believe that we're putting the final nail in the Covenant when we kill Truth. The entire atmosphere of the mission, along with the fact that it's literally called the Covenant, creates this idea that this is it. Truth committed all his forces, aka the entire Covenant, to the Ark, because this is what the centuries-old religion that's the very core of the Covenant itself was leading up to. So, when Arbiter killed Truth and the Allies defeated all the Covenant forces on the Ark, you're made to believe that that's it. The Covenant have been entirely defeated and are no more. Again, Cortana even says it herself in the prologue. But then came Halo 4, where one of the first things you're greeted with is an entire Covenant fleet attacking you. Of course, the last we'd heard of the Covenant was that they'd been defeated, so people were rightly confused. However, the reasoning for this is actually far more valid and acceptable than the Floods. The Covenant are like any evil organization or religion or conglomerate or whatever. They aren't just a single entity. There's plenty of offshooting divisions, if you want to call them that, and Julim Dharma's Covenant in Halo 4 are one of the many examples of this. When an organization gets as big as the Covenant was, you can't expect it to just remain as one single body. There are going to be internal disagreements and also power-hungry individuals who believe they should be at the top. And then, when the head is cut off the main body, these individuals are going to try and capitalize on the power vacuum that's been created. It makes sense that we never saw these splinter factions in the original trilogy. Not only would it have made, no sense story-wise, but the main body of the Covenant were so large and prevalent that no splinter faction would have been able to even put a dent in them. However, when the Covenant were defeated, there was a lot more breathing room in the galaxy for these factions to thrive and attempt to fill their spot, so it makes total sense for a Covenant to exist following the Human-Covenant War. However, the execution of this has been far from flawless, and I'm absolutely sympathetic to those who believe that their defeat in Halo 3 has been sort of retroactively nullified. First off, and I get why this is the case, but 343's insistence to continue to call these factions merely the Covenant does a terrible job at disassociating them from the Covenant that we defeated. Many casual fans probably thought them showing up in Halo 4 meant that Halo 3 had been semi-retconned, and despite that absolutely not being the case, I can see why it's believed. And secondly, we've now defeated the Covenant twice, once in Halo 3 and then again in Halo 5, where Arbiter says,
"Hunt them to the last. The day we extinguish the Covenant's light, forever!"
And yet, post Halo 5 and also in Halo Infinite, I can bet right now that they will be in the game for reasons that I don't think I need to go into. The problem here is that we've dealt in absolutes far too many times.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
And it's gotten to the point now where absolutes aren't actually absolutes. The Covenant have never been fully defeated, and I doubt they ever will be. That said, calling all of these small factions just the Covenant, in my opinion, does kind of detract from the defeat of the main original Covenant in Halo 3, but only partly. And finally, we have a smaller, and yet, in my opinion, equally egregious plot point that I am absolutely torn on, and it relates to 343 Guilty Spark. Now, I would argue that the cleanest, most unambiguous end to any story arc in Halo 3 was that of Guilty Spark. He'd been there throughout the entire original trilogy, constantly flicking between friend and foe, but his death was very absolute. It was very, very clear that we killed him at the end of Halo 3. So, when he showed up again in Primordium, alive, on the Ark, a year after Halo 3, I know that I got quite a bit annoyed. Basically, what happened was the UNSC picked up a faint transmission from the Ark, and the team sent to investigate it found the barely alive remains of Spark. While he was interrogated, he secretly hacked into the ship's systems, before commandeering it entirely and forcing the crew into cryosleep. He then set out on a course to find the librarian, who he believed was still alive. At this point, he was more Chakass than Guilty Spark, who was the ancient human that he was before he became Guilty Spark. Long story there, but still, this to me really does nullify his death in Halo 3. After just killing Johnson, you finally get to laser the fuck out of a character that's betrayed you more than Ada Wong betrayed Leon Kennedy. Seeing him explode after all he's done is extremely satisfying, but knowing that you didn't actually kill him and that he's now off on his very own story arc really does detract from it, in my opinion, at least. Granted, this is all happening in the books, not the games like the previous two, and it was at least written incredibly well, but still, the fact that he's alive is, I don't know, it's annoying to me, at least. So, ultimately, has Halo's original trilogy been rendered pointless? Well, it honestly depends on how you view things. I really don't think that there's any right or wrong answer here. There are definite canonical reasons for certain plot points being resurrected, but for some, that's besides the point. At the end of the day, the original trilogy tied up all these story arcs in a neat, satisfying bow, and to unravel them detracts from their conclusion's significance. However, like I said, whether you agree with the argument or not is entirely subjective. Both sides have plenty of valid points, so I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments, because, boy, I imagine that a lot of people are going to have some pretty strong opinions on this both ways. So, that's all for today. I hope that you guys enjoyed, and remember, please keep the comments civil. At least we aren't dealing with Call of Duty Zombies levels of retcons here. Halo, hopefully, will never get that bad. Anyways, I want to give a big thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the support. It really does mean the world to me. And thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you in the next one.